Outside the Box Reviews, we have Figure Wars. And today we are looking at the NECA Player Select Assassin's Creed Revelations Ezio the Mentor and the Mcfarlane Assassin's Creed Wave 3 Ezio Auditore figure. And to me, looking at the comparison between the two Altair figures was just the warm-up, and here we're in for the real fight. NECA's version of the Assassin's Creed Revelations Ezio figure was really just a slight retooling to the base body they used for their Assassin's Creed Brotherhood version of Ezio, but to this day, that's still one of the coolest figures NECA has ever produced, in my opinion. I love the insane amount of articulation they gave that body, and it's just a top-notch figure, in my opinion. So Mcfarlane has a lot to live up to here. So let's not waste any more time and get into the fight. Now, both Ezios come with a long sword. NECA's version is very ornate. It has a very intricate hilt back here with some red dots on it. This kind of weird flailing out shape to it, and some sculpting down the blade, some little detail marks, and a nice silver color they picked for it. It's just basically a slightly metallic gray, but it looks like a real blade to me, and it works very well. Ezio can hold the blade very easily. He has a hand designed just for gripping it, and there's no actual sheath on his belt for it, but there's definitely into place where you could just slide it in there. I'm going back and looking at different clips from the game, and without actually going and popping the game in my system and playing it again, seem to be some pictures from the video game where he has a sheath here, and some where he just puts the sword under his belt, so I'm not entirely sure what's actually there in the game. Mcfarlane's long sword is much less interesting. It's just a simple little curved blade and a very, very drab looking little hilt on it. And I was looking up a list of the swords found in Assassin's Creed Revelations, and I might have missed it, but I did not see this on there. It's a little disappointing. It's just very bland, where NECA's version is very ornate and cool looking. The blade does fit easily into Ezio's hand here. Mcfarlane actually comes with two different gripping hands, one for each side, so you actually have him hold it in either hand. And as I mentioned earlier, this version has a sheath on his belt, so you could slide that sword right in there for easy and convenient storage. Both figures also come with short swords or daggers. Once again, I'm a big fan of the NECA version. A nice silver, some red dots on the handle looking very ornate and very much like something you'd expect to see given the setting for this game. It's a nice sharp looking blade. This blade doesn't fit into his hand quite as securely as the sword does, mostly because of the way his thumb is sticking out, but it still works decently. Then it has its own little sheath here on the belt, and you can slide it right in there, and you have convenient weapon storage. Mcfarlane's version, once again, is more boring. It's just a brown handle, some gray on the end. The paint color's nice. It's actually a square blade. It's not even a sharpened edge. And I really wish I'd had time to go back and play the game again. It's been years, but I really want to see if this is actually in the game. You can also see the end of it is flattened off. I don't know if mine broke or if this is just how it came, but it's a little strange. But the Mcfarlane figure holds it decently, just similar to the NECA version. It's just a little loose in his hand. Then once again, he has a sheath, and you could slide it right in and have it stored on his belt. Now, just like Altair, NECA's version comes with one accessory, Mcfarlane's doesn't. Here we have the crossbow, and I've always loved this piece. It's a very ornately sculpted crossbow. It's got kind of like an eagle head on here, all this ornate sculpting here, painted silver, some kind of bronze or gold at the top. You actually have the rope. It's a very, very well sculpted piece. NECA's version does come with a trigger finger hand. Then you can get it in Ezio's hand like he's gonna fire it. It's a little awkward. He holds it kind of at a weird angle, so it's not the best looking once you have it in his hand, but it does work. Also, similar to his sword, he doesn't have official storage for it, but you could definitely slide it on here underneath the strap on his back. There's even a place on it that looks like it should actually clip on to that strap, and that's pretty much how he carried it in the game, so to me that works just fine. For the sculpt, this is another figure I think NECA hit it out of the park on. I love the aged look they gave Ezio here. I think it looks very true to the character in the game. He still kind of has the scar visible on his lip, even though the beard is covering it up. His hood is nicely sculpted. This one's a little different than the previous hoods we've gotten. After Altair, the other Ezio figures had one that just was connected to his head and came down, was loose down here at the bottom. But this has this full kind of ring around it, so it's just kind of its own separate piece, but I think looks a little better than than even the other two entries just because of the overall design of it. He's a nice scarf sculpted around his neck. He has probably the most ornate costume he has in any of the games. Some very heavy armor going on over his shoulder here, which looks very nice. All these straps on here are rubberized, so they kind of create a separate layer, really building up the look of the figure. He also has some rubberized fur up here over his shoulder, which I think is a nice touch. More of the same going down the back. Now, this figure does have one thing I kind of dislike. He has visible screws, which is kind of ugly, but especially when you have the strap down here in the right position and you put the crossbow on his back, you could pretty much hide those up fairly easily, but still kind of an eyesore. This whole upper part of his costume is soft rubber and the rest is hard sculpted on the body. He has two gauntlets here. This one has some very nice detail on it, very ornate sculpting in here. We have his bare hand. I mentioned earlier he has the thumb sticking up. You can even see some veins in the sculpt there. And then he has the hook. I don't remember what this is called. I keep wanting to call it the hook shot, but I know that's Zelda, not Assassin's Creed. But I love this weapon. This weapon was so much fun to play around with in the game, and it works pretty well here. It slides in and out, just kind of similar to any of the Predator blades that we're familiar with. The mechanism is sculpted well underneath, and the only real downside with this one is I found that it kind of pops out easy. You can see there's a peg at the back of it, kind of meant to keep it from going all the way out, but it doesn't always stop it. But it works just fine. The other gauntlet is pretty much a mirror image of the first one, same kind of detailing on it. Here we get an open hand, more of the veins sculpted on there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this hand is meant to hold the crossbow, but we could pop this out and pop in a fist. So you could change up Ezio's look, and then he has the standard hidden blade here. It doesn't retract in quite as far as I'd like it to. It's still protruding past the fingers when his fisted hand, but it will slide out nicely and still looks pretty good. There actually is some sculpted detail in it, making it look nice and sharp. Around the waist, we go back to more rubberized material over top of the sculpt. So we get all these different belts and sashes going around his waist. We also have the scabbard I talked about earlier, as well as just the place where this one sword sits. Some very nice ornate sculpting in here. All these little details coming down his skirt here are actually sculpted in, not just painted detail, which is amazing. In the back, we get a little pouch with some very ornate detail as well, and another little tassel bit hanging down, though this is actually connected to the rest, which is kind of a rare move for NECA. But all these pieces are very movable, very pliable, so you really can get them out of the way when you're trying to get Ezio into some extreme poses, which I really like. Underneath, we have his pants sculpted, and while they're simple, you can see there are seams sculpted in there, which are pretty nice. And he has some very cool looking ornate boots, flared up very much at the top, a nice leathery texture going down, and then all these little buckles and ornate details on it. Mcfarlane's figure, I don't like the head sculpt nearly as much. It doesn't look like Ezio to me. It just looks like some grumpy old dude. They just really did not capture the look of the character for me at all. And at first, when I first saw him in the store, I thought maybe this one just had some bad paint apps or something. I dug through them, and this is the best of the bunch, but none of them really look that much like Ezio. His hood is nicely done, though. There's all these sculpted little filigree pieces in it, and the hood is actually removable this time, so we could pull that completely off the character. We have a fully sculpted head underneath, and that's nice. I like that you can uncover his head, and I have to wonder why this is so difficult that they couldn't do it on the other Assassin's figures. He does also have the scarf around his neck. We have the armor plating up on his shoulder, all the straps down here. Now these are all hard sculpted. They're not pliable at all. Even the fur over here on his shoulder, it's not pliable, so it's going to definitely hinder your articulation when we get there. But there is some nice detail in it. The gauntlet has some good detail in it as well. Here on the other side of his arm, I have his retracted version of his hidden blade. Once again, kind of squared off at the tip, which I think is an odd trend with the Mcfarlane figures. And then on the other side here, I could show you his extended out blade. It looks decent, has some good sculpting to it. Once again, squared off at the tip. It works. It doesn't look wrong. It just isn't as visually interesting as the NECA ones by far. This Ezio also comes with two pairs of hands. We have two gripping hands, as you can see this example here, and then we have two open hands, which I really do like, because to me that's more of an iconic assassination hand. There's some good details sculpted across the chest, underneath all of these different straps. He of course has his belt with the sculpted on dual scabbards, all the little kind of jewels on his belt. The cloth piece underneath. Got a series of pouches going across the back. Give it to Mcfarlane, there are no screw holes on the back here. And then more sculpted detail down the rest of his skirt. This skirt is definitely a little more rigid than the NECA one, but it's not too bad as far as pliability, so you can definitely still pose the character with all this. And we peel that back, we see he's got some very wrinkly pants. There's a nice texture to them. They look pretty good. Then he has very different boots than the NECA version. These are more armory looking pieces, not the leather looking boots. And that continues down to the bottom, just looking like they're steel plated. We even see a strap in the back where you can see the cloth of his clothing underneath. So a different look than NECA went with, but still a cool looking one. As for paint, it's another area where I think NECA did a great job. The face has some multiple layers of skin tones to it. The eyes and eyebrows are well done. There's not a lot of slop. They brought a little bit of brown into the gray and black on his beard to kind of give it some more texture. Most of his clothing is the same kind of dark teal turquoise color, but there's kind of a black wash on it to bring out some lowlights, and the silver detailing of all this extra ornate filigree on it is just beautifully done. Very precise painting in here, so I definitely appreciate that. The leather pieces all kind of have multiple layers of browns in them to bring out different texture and shading. The fur on his shoulder has a nice black wash amongst the white to really bring out all the detail as well. Some areas, like the belt around his waist, the red sash, could use a little bit of wash to him. There's a little bit there, but not a lot, making it look a little flat. But overall, the general paint scheme is pretty consistent throughout. And even when we get to places like the gauntlet, all the little beads are painted. There's a little slop here on mine, but overall not too bad of a job. Underneath the skirt, the pants are pretty plain, just gray plastic, so nothing to write home about. But then we get some more nice browns and silvers on the boots. I think my biggest complaint with the Mcfarlane version is the flesh tone. I think they went a little too Jersey Shore with the orangey color they painted Ezio here. But beyond that, I think they brought some great detail to the paint job. His costumes, it's teal, turquoise. It's a little darker on Mcfarlane's version than it is on NECA. And then they use some blue dry brushing to kind of highlight out all these details. And because their hood has a lot more ornate details sculpted in, it really kind of makes that shine. Instead of doing the very thin line precision painting that NECA did, they went for the wash version that actually works pretty well. I don't think it worked quite as well here on the fur. The fur is kind of a brownish yellow, and they painted some kind of white highlights to it. I think this is a little lacking. It looks a little flat. But all through the rest of the costume, the paint really does highlight the sculpt, all the nice silver accents added on. It does get a little dull up here in the armor pieces. It ends up looking a bit flat. Another area that could probably use a nice wash. But the browns of the straps, they're supposed to be leather, look very good. Sheets look very nice as well. So a nice black wash over the red sash across his waist. And all the same details NECA captured, painted on the gauntlets are done here. All the little rivets and even the little fur bits on the underside are well detailed. Underneath the pants, once again, kind of just molded in one color. And then the silver boots also are a little flat, but it's a little more forgivable with the design of these. For articulation, NECA has a great range. There's a ball joint at the neck, but because of this collar, there's not a whole lot of up and down movement, which is a little disappointing. But you do get some really good side-to-side motion there. Not hindered at all by the cowl because it is a nice rubbery plastic. The arms are on a pin socket joint, so they can go pretty far out, as well as forward and back. The shoulder pieces, as I mentioned earlier, are rubberized, so you're not going to be hindered by them. There's also an extra joint here in the shoulder where you can move the arm forward and back in the socket, which can allow you to get some really dynamic poses. There's also a swivel at the bicep, a bend at the elbow, which is pretty minimal, probably even less than 45 degrees at best, but it still is a bend. There's also a rotation at the gauntlet there. The hand is on a ball joint. It can swivel in the socket as well as hinge at the wrist itself by a different joint. We get a very nice ab crunch, a little loose on this figure, but by having the crossbow on his back, you can actually kind of tighten it up a bit. We have a swivel at the waist. We actually have a second swivel at the waist. I can actually turn the legs up at the hips and swivel basically a second piece in here. The legs are on a pin socket joint. They can go forward and back and out to the side. We can swivel at the upper leg, double jointed knee, swivel at the top of the boot, a hinge at the ankle, as well as a little bit of an ankle rocker, and toe articulation. Mcfarlane gives us a ball joint at the head, so you can really access it the most without the hood on. And you do get a good range. You'll look up and down, side to side very easily. And then you could always pose his head how you want, and then return the hood to it. The arms are on a pin socket joint, but because of this hard sculpted armor, they don't go out very far. And then of course forward and back is also hindered. We can bend at the elbow as well as rotate. Still loving Mcfarlane's wrist joints where you could swivel at the hand as well as move on that axis, and then change the orientation of the hand and move on a different axis. Still just a swivel in the waist. Mine's very stiff on this figure. Got ball joints at the upper legs with a pretty limited range of motion. We have a bend of the knee a little less than 90 degrees as well as a swivel, and then we have a ball joint at the foot. So when I was planning to do this review, when I started this review, I was planning to sink my teeth right into that Mcfarlane version and just rip it to shreds. But you know what? It's not a horrible figure. It has the same faults that every other figure in this line seems to have. The leg articulation just isn't enough, and it needs a better torso articulation to really make it pop. In this one, the head sculpt's a little off and the weapons are a little bland. But I think if I wasn't comparing it to the NECA version, if I never had that version, I don't think I would be so upset about that. Maybe the head sculpt, but definitely not the weapons. But going in here, being completely prepared to just shred this figure to bits, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's not as bad as I thought it was. But it's nowhere near as good as NECA's. There's no kidding ourselves there. NECA's version is a beautiful, beautiful figure. It is expertly sculpted, expertly painted. It has some flaws, and some I didn't even touch on in the course of the review. This figure isn't that old, but some of my joints are getting very loose on it. But overall, it's just so well executed and so supremely cool looking. And the biggest thing to me, incredibly poseable. Pick any Ezio action scene, you can come close at least to replicating it with the NECA version. Mcfarlane, well, as you see here, I can't even get him into a convincing lunging jump. So I'm going to continue to recommend the NECA version. I'm going to give a very weak recommend to the Mcfarlane version. If you're enjoying the Mcfarlane line of Assassin's Creed figures so far, you'll probably like it. But coming from a place where I have been spoiled by the best, I just can't fully back this figure and I can't get that excited about it. So let me know in the comments below, am I showing the NECA version a little too much favoritism? I really don't think so, but if you can make a case for it, please explain. I'd like to see it. I'm assuming the majority of people will probably agree with me on this one. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And until next time, this has been our Outside the Box Reviews. Stay tuned for more to come.